Once again, welcome. We had to cut short our normal break there because, as it is, we're actually starting about 5 minutes later than we normally do because of the extra remarks. I was remiss in one of my earlier remarks to leave out that that promotional card you have at your place setting was done by a volunteer who actually works with me named Michael Romano. He's sitting at a table over on the side there, so just wanted to make sure he was properly recognized. Our December 1st Friday Club speaker is Bishop of Cleveland, the Most Reverend Nelson J. Perez. To introduce him, we have Sister Rita Mary Harwood of the Sisters of Notre Dame. We've already introduced her, but Sister was the speaker at our January 2015 luncheon, where she spoke to us of the issue of immigration. In addition to that, she has a strong focus in the area of prison ministry, which is near and dear to my heart, as my father had a career in the Connecticut Department of Corrections in the 70s and 80s. So please welcome Sister Rita Mary Harwood.
Well, good afternoon to all of you. It's wonderful to be here with you and to see this whole room just filled with absolutely wonderful people. So thank you for being here. I've been asked to do something today that I find both easy and challenging. Easy, because I've ministered now with Bishop Perez for the past 12 weeks. And I've come to know him as a pastor who has truly come to be with his people, who cares deeply and responds generously, who laughs freely, and as my secretary, Paula, told me this morning, he's just not stuffy. Is he still smiling? Good. It's my job, you know. Challenging, because how do you introduce someone who I feel quite confident in saying everybody in this community already knows? I turned on the TV on Tuesday morning at 5:40 a.m. to see the bishop looking at me from the studio of Channel 3, talking about We Give Catholic. In the past 12 weeks, I visited many places all over this diocese, only to meet people who have been at the district masses all over, coming from Summit County, Geauga, Lake, Cuyahoga, Lorain, Wayne, Ashland, and Medina counties, who say to me, I was at the bishop's mass. There were hundreds of people there. Somebody said thousands. I was at the bishop's mass, and I got in line to meet him, and I got my picture taken with him. And at that, they pull out their cell phones only to show me either the selfie or the picture that was taken with their cell phone. I was at Jesu, and a parishioner said to me, wow, sister, this is really a good time. We not only have a smiling pope, but we've got a smiling bishop. Or one of the young, that's right. One of the young students from one of our Catholic high schools where the bishop had visited said to me, hey, sister, I ate lunch with the bishop. Did you know he really likes pizza? Or the undocumented migrant Pedro, who met the bishop at the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Office. And as they met, I could see tears in the eyes of both of them. Or our bishop, who, if you looked around this room, has become a friend, and I think in some ways a mentor to the men at the Grafton Correctional Institution. Their graphics design department did posters, and my staff put them around on the walls. I hope we're not going to get in any trouble from the City Club. But they depict our bishop as the bishop of the streets of Cleveland, as placing him in front of or on top of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and looking like he is very much on the go, and finally named him their bishop, who is always welcome to the Grafton Correctional Institution. On the flyer announcing the bishop's presentation here at the First Friday Club, you will have read of his birth in Miami, his growing up in New Jersey, his studies and then time spent teaching in Puerto Rico, and his response to God's call to the seminary, to life in a parish and with a parish community as a parochial vicar and as a pastor, all in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, to the ministry of bishop in the Diocese of Rockville Center, and finally to a call he received in June of this year, where he heard from the voice at the other end of the line, "Bishop, have you ever been to Cleveland?" That question was the answer to our prayer, a prayer we all prayed together every Sunday in the intercessory prayers. Beginning in January of 2017, we prayed for a shepherd bishop, didn't we? A bishop whom God would send to be with us here in this diocese. And we heard and have come to know God's response. "I will appoint over you a shepherd after my own heart, who will shepherd you wisely and prudently." It is certainly my privilege and my honor to introduce to you and to welcome to the First Friday Club our Bishop, Nelson Perez.
She is so kind, isn't she? And sister, I thought it was millions of people went out to those masses. What's this thousands of people thing? I'm thrilled to be here today to celebrate church and to celebrate our community and our faith and our fellowship and celebrate you. And in a particular way, I'm really happy to see the young people that are here from our high schools. How about if we ask them to stand up? St. Brendan's, Benedict's, Cleveland Catholic. Give them all a round of applause. The pizza is coming out. And so it has been 12 weeks, and in some ways, I said to somebody the other day, a friend of mine, so what's it feel like? He says, well, it feels like I've been here 6 months, right? But in a good way, in a really good way. It's been really fascinating to meet people of such great faith and excitement, and when you come in from outside and you see what you don't see every day because you get used to it, right? You take it for granted, but I see great beauty in this local church, and an incredible vibrancy and great joy, and it's really been a joy to be here for the last 12 weeks, and there's not a day that I don't get up, and I get up early and go into chapel early and thank the Lord for being here, even though I was surprised. Bishop Grease will tell you it's not like they talk to you about these things. Where were you when you were called to be made a bishop?
In the abbot's office.
In the abbot's office. And it's just a call, right? And when you're on the floor while they're telling you that, and you can't tell anybody. Isn't this a great church? It really is pretty amazing. But yeah, the nuncio did say to me, have you ever been to Cleveland? when he says, why would he be asking me that for? And he says, well, you'll get to know it well. And then they ask you, do you accept? Yeah, what are you going to say at that point? Yeah, really? But thank you so much for coming here today to the First Friday Club that happens on Thursday. I have heard now about 5 different interpretations as to why this happens. But it's great to be here and to share with you. I still get asked, everywhere I go, well, so what are you going to do? And my response continues to be the same. I really don't have to do anything. And just allow this local church to kind of unfold, right? Just unfold. Watch it. Listen. See and learn. And to me, it's been a great joy to see that, because every day is another surprise. Right? Every day is another thing. Like, I didn't even know what this We Give Catholics thing was about. I had no clue. But I learned, right? And We Give Catholic this year gave $300,000 more than last year. Right? And the excitement of the staff of the Catholic Foundation, as I walked in and out there, they had pizza. Where are the people from the foundation? They had pizza. And that was good pizza too. And their excitement, even and that, to know that those dollars are going to make lots of things happen in parishes and schools and institutions, and they were more excited to see this thing happening than if it was coming into their own pocket. They were so excited. And so I'm so pleased to be here and so joyful to be here. Today is the feast of St. Andrew, one of the apostles. Last night I had dinner at the Abbey of St. Andrew and prayed with the Benedictine monks. And so today the church has this wonderful feast of one of the apostles. I love the apostles because we would have never hired these guys. Really. We would have never, by today's standards, they would never have had a chance to work for the church. Never. And so I love when they call you and I, Bishop Grease, when they call us successors of the apostles. Because on the one side, people say that with a sense of, of honor. But what I hear was, do you know who these guys were? They all ran for the hills. One betrayed him, one denied him. And then the rest disappeared. Yes, there was the beloved disciple that people think it was John, and maybe it was, but the gospel doesn't say that it was John. It just says the beloved disciple. And I often say when I talk about this, you know who stayed? Who stayed? The women. So let's give the women a round of applause. And in particular, we give our women religious a round of applause. Where are they? We have sister here, women religious, stand up. And we love our priest, right? Where are they? There's one over there. There's one over here. There's one over there. And let me say we love our deacons before I get in trouble. There's 2 of them here. Because if I don't, I'll get letters. I call them nasty grams. I'd like to share with you some thoughts of today, the Feast of St. Andrew, about what does it mean to be an apostle, and just some thoughts of where the Lord, through God's Spirit, is guiding us, the church, at this particular time. At this particular time. The thoughts I want to share about the Feast of St. Andrew actually come from today's second reading. From Romans. I'm not home if it's... But how can they call him in whom they have not believed? Paul says. And how can they believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone to preach? And how can people preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring the good news. Comes from the letter of Paul to the Romans in the second reading of today's Mass. And he says some wonderful things. It talks about, thank God that those original apostles went beyond their comfort zone, broke through the barriers of their fear and the barriers of isolation and the barriers of stepping outside their culture. Because if not, we wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be a priest. I wouldn't be a bishop. You wouldn't be what you're doing. It would have ended with the death of the last apostle. And they had a lot to overcome. They had a lot to overcome. You know, they today they're kind of like these distant figures, but they were, you know, people like you and I who had incredible ups and downs, the ups of being around Christ and their hearts as, you know, burning on fire, you know, and they talk about those disciples of the Emmaus, weren't our hearts burning as we heard him? But then like that down, right? When it seemed like, well, it was nice while it lasted. It was nice while it lasted. And they tell Jesus himself, who they don't recognize, and they kind of get upset at when Jesus approaches them on the way to Emmaus. Remember that wonderful story? And he hears that they're talking, and what are they talking about? And he asks them, so what are you guys talking about? Remember what they said? He says, where have you been? Where have you been? Right? Where have you been? He says, don't you know the things that have just happened? Don't you know? And then he says, well, what sort of things? Like, what happened? And they told him what happened and how they had great hopes and they had great dreams. And then it was just like washed away. It's interesting because that teaches us something, that whole encounter of Jesus with these two disciples of Emmaus teaches us something about how to accompany people, right? Jesus just showed up and unites them himself to their walk. And he didn't give them the Bible class right away, right? He didn't do that. He didn't start, quote unquote, preaching. He had a lot to say, but he wanted to first to hear what they had to say and what they were talking about. He didn't pull them into the Bible study. Now, after he heard where they were at, then he helped them to understand how these ups and these lows and these moments of lights and shadows were at the end really the unfolding of the will of God. And how all of this was really part of the unfolding of God's plan. The gospel writer tells us that these guys were so moved by this thing that they were never the same. Their hearts were burning. And then they went and they told everybody. Right? Then they went and they told everybody. And thank God they did, right? Because if they didn't, we wouldn't be here. Thank God those apostles broke the walls of that upper room where they went to hide. They went to hide because they were scared to death. If this is what they did to him, what are they going to do to us? And they were scared. They were scared that the fate of Christ would ultimately become their fate. And you know what? It did. They were right on that one. They were right. They were right. And they tried to get out of it. They tried to hide. I think it's a legend, but there's a story that Peter was in Rome and he wanted to get out of Dodge, right? He knew it was coming down the pike, and he's on his way out of Rome, and he has an encounter with Christ. I forget what that place is called. It's Via Appia, is it? Yeah. Where are the Italians? The ones going in Rome. He's not Italian. And so, they tried to get out of it, but God had his way of bringing them back, because he had a plan. And that was the beginning of the church. And the church is pretty old. It's as old as Deacon Jim. Who's growing a mustache, by the way. And the church has a lot of wisdom, ups and downs and all over the place, and great moments and difficult moments. Napoleon said to his bishop, I'm going to destroy your church. I'm going to destroy the church. You know what the bishop said to Napoleon? You could try if you want, but we've been trying for 1,500 years. Church is a fascinating community. And at different times the Lord has asked the church different things. I think in the last 50 years, the Lord in our time, our history, has been like screaming at us, screaming to the church and the world. In some ways, that loud voice of God came to a head, when I was a little kid and they were planning to go to the moon. And John the 23rd said that the church had to open itself up to the world, right? And that's what the church began to do. It had come out of a history where it was kind of closed in on itself, and now had to open itself out to the world. And the Holy Father is coming out of that, beginning with John the 23rd. I said Mass on top of the tomb of John the 23rd twice. If you've been to St. Peter's Basilica, he's in the bottom of a side altar, and you could see the guy laying there. So it was a little weird. You're saying Mass, and he's like down there. At one point I said, stop it. John the 23rd, what a figure. And he opens up the church to the world. And the Holy Father has began to follow that. Just look at what's been happening. Paul VI writes this incredible little document. It's about, it's like 20 pages. It's nothing. And in that document, he says that the church's deepest identity, the reason why it exists, is to evangelize. That's his purpose. And while it might do lots of other things, that is the reason for his existence. And we Catholics listened to that and said, what's that? That's like what the Protestants do. And then the Protestants come to us and say, it's about time you Catholics start evangelizing. And my response to that was, buddy, you're a Protestant because the Catholic Church evangelized you. Where do you think your Bible came from? It came from us. That's where it came from. And John Paul II, what a figure that guy was, right? John Paul the Great. What a figure. He called the world to this new evangelization, and then he went and did it himself. Right? He didn't just talk about it, he just talked the talk, but he walked it, right? And And remember that little thing. You guys are too young, but I think it was a book, and then it was a cartoon or something. It was Where's Waldo? Right? It's like, where's John Paul II now? Because this guy was all over the planet. Every time you turn on the TV, he was someplace else. You kind of lost track as to where he was. And the first time I saw him, I was a teenager. He visited New York in 1979. And he visited there with 20,000 young people in Madison Square Garden and like the Pope. And this guy like blew everybody away. He was strong and vibrant and stood up straight, filled with vitality. But he's a guy that said to the church, listen, the church has to be out there. The church has to be out there because that's where it always has to be. And then he went and did it himself. And even when he could no longer do that, he was still doing it. Down to a week before the guy dies, he was up at that window, right? He couldn't even talk. He was drooling. He taught us how to live life intensely, because he lived intensely, right? You know, this guy didn't just become the priest. He ends up becoming the Pope. Talk about intensity. He lived life intensely. And then he taught us and modeled for us the dignity of growing old and growing sick and dying, and the dignity of that. And then Benedict comes across, and can you imagine following John Paul II? How many times did they say to Benedict, you know, you got big Pradas to fill. You got big, the Pope wears Pradas, right? You got big shoes to fill. I would imagine he would have said, I got it. Benedict, the Thomas Aquinas of the 21st century. That guy's like a major, major theologian and a humble man. And then Francis comes along and, now everybody's figuring, well, what is Francis going to say? Right? He always says sometimes he says things that, says, really? Right? Unbelievable. And what is he saying to the church? Well, he's not creating this story. He's continuing this story. That the church has to be out there. That the church is not a place that you come to only. It is really a church from which you are sent. That we can't just stick around and focus on ourselves. And I was a pastor for 12 years. Probably the best time of my priesthood. Someone asked me, interesting, was a couple of the monks last night said, so what's the difference between being an auxiliary bishop and being now the ordinary diocesan bishop? And I said, well, that's a good question. And I said, but if anything, it feels like being a pastor again. Right? It feels like being a pastor, just of a very big parish. A really big parish. But Francis has been calling the church to what the Holy Fathers prior to him, beginning with John the 23rd, have been calling the church already, that we have to be a church on mission. And that's a little tough for us Americans, because we're taught, our value system teaches us the opposite, right? But what do they tell us since we're little kids that you don't talk about? There's two things you don't talk about. What are they? What is it? Religion and politics. Might be wise not to talk about politics. But religion? Where are all the diocesan employees? Raise your hand. Give them all a round of applause for all they do. Now, I have to tell you guys, if we didn't talk religion, you wouldn't have a job. Right? I wouldn't have a job. The fact is that the Catholic faith is to be shared. Is to be shared. And so what Pope Francis is kind of challenging the church is to turn outward. Now, as a pastor for close to 12 years, 11, 12 years, that was a tough thing, because a lot of the times everything that we did on the parish level really focused on us. Really. I don't know about here, but I could just speak of my experience. That most of the activities that we did, that I did as a pastor with my parish, had to do with us. Had to do with us. And the mindset was that. I remember I had a school and they wanted to do like promote the school, so they did this big banner, right, to promote the school and market the school and stuff like that. And so I asked, so where are you putting this banner? It says, inside the gym. He says, why would you do that? Why would you do that? And when I said, why don't you put it on a billboard somewhere? Inside the gym? And I says, well, there's a lot of CYO games that take place there. Lots of people go there. Yeah, who have kids in other Catholic schools. So where did you get your marketing degree? But that was the mentality that somehow, and it was hard to break. And I think the Holy Father's trying to do the same thing with us, to the church worldwide, to understand that we are to be a community that's on the way, right? On mission. And he says it in tough ways. He says it in tough ways, you know. He says a church closed in on itself is a sick church. Now, don't send me nasty grams if you don't like that. Send it to him. He said it. It's a sick church. So we have to heed his call and the call of the spirit of the church in the last 50 years to be a church, and I've said it all over the place, using Pope Francis's own words in the Joy of the Gospel, a church that is a community of missionary disciples. A community of missionary disciples who takes initiative, who's out there first, who takes initiative, is involved, is engaged in the world around it, meets people where they are and accompanies them with the truth of the gospel, right? You have to sometimes be a little careful with that meet people where they are thing. Sometimes that gets misinterpreted, right? You have to meet people where they are, but with the truth of the gospel, right? Because it is the truth of the gospel that changes hearts and transforms hearts. And while Jesus met Matthew, the tax collector, right where he was, right? He didn't stand on the Mount of Olives and say to Matthew, come over here. He went to where Matthew was, right at the tax collector table where he was stealing everybody blind, right? And he went right to his tax collector table. But he didn't sit down next to him and start collecting taxes too, right? He went to the tax collector table, and then he said to him, come and follow me. In fact, leave the table. Leave that table. That table's not a good place to be, he said to Matthew. And while he finds you and I where we are, not every place that we are is a good place to be, right? And he wants us to be where it's a good place to be. And Francis speaks about a church that is concerned with being fruitful, to being successful. Wants us to be fruitful. Being fruitful comes from love, right? Comes from love. And a church that is joyful. Joyful not because everything goes well. It doesn't, right? It doesn't. Everything that can happen sometimes will happen. Not like that. Not that type of joy is actually short-lived. It has a very short shelf life. If it revolves around whether things go well or not. On any given day, 5 things go well and 10 not. So what are you going to do? It's a joy that is rooted in the experience of encounter with a risen Lord. That each one of us here at some point in our journey, in our lives, we have had. If not, simply we wouldn't be here today. And we need to go back to that wellspring, right? We need to go back to where we encountered the Lord and where that moment that we encountered Christ, and from that moment on, we were never the same. But know that that encounter was a gift to then be shared with others. And that's where the Lord is guiding the church. And if I have a hope and a dream for the Church of Cleveland, the church in the United States, it's actually that we renew our commitment to be apostles, to be sent, to be missionaries to the world around us that really needs it right now. That really needs it right now. So that's in a nutshell. I don't know what time this is done. What time is this done? Now. God bless you.
You nailed it. Nice. Thank you.
You're just happy I'm done.
I enjoyed it thoroughly. And now I'm very curious about the pizza, because if you're from the New York area and you said that was good pizza, I need to get some. Okay, well, thank you so much, Bishop Perez, for the wonderful presentation. And I guess we're going to open it up to questions. We're doing it slightly different today, as you might expect. We have Anita Simcoe with a microphone over there, and Bob Tack with a microphone over there. So if you want to ask a question, get their attention, and when you get the microphone, go right ahead.
Me. Want me to go? Yes, please tell us about the work of the Committee on Cultural Diversity that you are involved with.
Where was that? There's a voice from. I am a member of I am a bishop member of the Committee on Cultural Diversity for the United States Catholic Bishops of Catholic Conference of Bishops, and I was the one person was happy. Yes, and I was just elected by the body of bishops to be the next chair, and there are. That committee is divided into 5 subcommittees. Right now, I'm the chair of Hispanic Affairs. Right? There's the subcommittee for African American Catholics, Asian and Pacific Islanders, migrants, refugees, and people on the move or travelers. And in that, interestingly, are the circus people. There's actually a whole ministry in the United States that focuses on people on the move and people in the circus. It's incredible, isn't it? And the bikers. Wow. I have a tricycle. Does that work? So it's a wonderful committee. It's the largest committee in the USCCB. Has 5 subcommittees, and its role in my thinking of it is. Its role is to make sure that the Catholic Church remains Catholic, right? What does it mean to be Catholic? It means to be universal. Jesus sent out his disciples to share the good news with all the nations, Sometimes we forget the all nations part, right? We forget that. And this committee makes sure that groups that might be minority in number are recognized and served in the church, because the church is a Catholic church. It's not an Italian church. It's not an Irish church. It's a Catholic church. I was asked when I came here back in July by some reporter about being a Hispanic bishop, and I says, there's no such thing. There's no such thing. I'm a Catholic bishop who happens to speak Spanish, right? But there's no like a Latin bishop. That doesn't exist. I'm a Catholic bishop, and this committee focuses on that, on the diversity and bringing about unity in the midst of diversity in the United States. The church in the United States is highly diverse. Highly diverse. Your particular parish might not be, but the church in the United States, it's very, very, very Catholic. Very Catholic. Sometimes it's the source of our joy. Sometimes it's the source of our tension. Nothing new. When people tell, the groups aren't getting along with each other. Hey, yeah, they never did. Have you read the first 3 chapters of the book of the Acts of the Apostles? The Jews weren't getting along with the Greeks, and they were complaining that, the very first council, the Council of Jerusalem, was because people weren't getting along. So when people say to me, when people don't get along and this, I says, yeah, got it. It's a work in progress. It's just taken 2,000 years, and we're not done. So, yes.
Bishop, thanks for your remarks today. Welcome to Cleveland, Ohio.
Thank you.
As a father, as many of us are mothers and fathers, we have a very rich humanitarian history. Our local Sam Miller has told us more than once, don't apologize for being Catholic. Mm-hmm. You've done amazing work as a Catholic church. My question to you concerns the 90% of 20-somethings that do not attend Mass, the 75% of the general Catholic population that does not attend Mass on a weekly basis, the 95% that does not attend Mass in Europe, we're told. What are we doing about the sacramental church, even though we're going out to the masses? How do we address the challenge of the sacramental church?
I think a change of mentality has to happen at the grassroots level of parish life, and parishes have to understand themselves as being turned outward, as I said before, right? That people talk about if there is a challenge right now in the church is not the ones that are here, though we could be challenging ourselves, right? But the ones that are not. Now they talk about the nuns, and I'm not talking about the nuns. I mean, they're not in any religion, right? We have to go out and get them and meet them and engage them. I'm just one person, right? That has to happen at the grassroots level, right? It has to happen at the level of neighborhoods and parishes and families. And we have to change hearts to do that, because we're not totally there yet. When I was a pastor in one of my parishes, I brought a group of people together, and the idea was that I wanted to visit every home in the neighborhood. Not just the Catholics, I mean every home. Home after home after home after home. That was Philadelphia. And I brought about 30 people, right? And the reaction was, I don't know if I feel comfortable doing that. Well, then we're in trouble. We're in deep trouble, right? And it was interesting because those same people that weren't comfortable doing that, some of them, Philadelphia was revolved around ward politics. I don't know how it functions here, but there was ward politics. So when it came time to election time, some of those people were canvassing the homes. And I couldn't understand that. And it was tough to get. It was like there was. I think there's a mentality. What does it mean to be a Catholic? You go to church on Sunday, you pay and you pray, and you don't eat meat on Fridays of Lent. And then somehow you checked off the and that's part of it. The pastors would say the pay and obey thing even more, but it's about giving as a gift what we have received as a gift. We have some work to do on that in that department. and move. And I don't know if pastoral councils and parishes get together and ask that question. How are we going to get to the 75% of people that are not sitting in the pews? They're talking about what the menu for the spaghetti dinner is going to be on Saturday. Spaghetti. Yes. Anybody else? Oh, I'm lucky.
Thank you, Bishop. I was just curious, what's your first impression of Cleveland?
I've said it all over the place. You drive too slow. You wait at corners until the light changes. That to me is amazing, though I broke the law this morning because I had to rush over to the office and there was no cars coming. Why would I wait? I find a city and the surroundings, of the Diocese of Cleveland is bigger than Cleveland. People are very, very warm. Again, when it's part of the way you live, you don't notice it as much as I notice it because I'm only here 12 weeks. But a community that's very warm, very engaged, very charitable, very generous. Very charitable and generous with their time and with their talent and with their treasure. Very giving. Very faith-filled. Very faith-filled. Those are my initial impressions. Mm-hmm. All right, great.
Once again, thank you very much, Bishop Perez, for a great presentation, very engaging, and we all certainly enjoyed it. Before we close out today's luncheon with a blessing, and we would normally have our spiritual moderator, Bishop Greaves, give that, but he's asked me to prevail upon Bishop Perez to do it for us. So after I say a couple of things, would you do that for us?
Sure.
Great. Excellent.
Don't talk too long, though.
I won't. We got to get people back to work, including me. Our January 2018 First Friday Club speaker will be Sister Susan Durkin. Sister Durkin currently serves as president of the Ursuline Sisters of Cleveland, who, with their 1850 arrival, were the first order of women religious in the Diocese of Cleveland. Sister Susan oversees the 145-member congregation. In 2006, Sister Susan assumed the position of Director of Development for the Ursulines. She was elected to congregational leadership and was installed as the Ursulines president in June 2012 and is currently serving her second term. Sister Susan serves as a trustee for Ursuline College, Beaumont School, and Urban Community School, which you may have heard of recently. She also serves on the board of the Sisters of Charity Health System. As another point of emphasis, I'd like to mention that in my point of view, if I might be so bold to suggest it, this club was a part of the new evangelization before it officially became a thing. We're celebrating our 60th year next year. And quite honestly, I think we were coming about in anticipation of what John Paul the Great was going to say. It actually, the inspiration for this club actually came out of a letter from Pope Pius XII in the late 50s. So that was actually starting to build even before Vatican II. So before we have the Bishop give a final blessing, I just would like to make sure to remind you that we have our new reservation system. Please book in advance for January 4th as we open our 60th year, and we look forward to seeing as many of you throughout the coming year as you can make. Thank you very much for joining us today. Drive safely, and have a great Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
And I'm going to ask Bishop Greaves to join me in giving the blessing. You get two bishops blessing you. The Lord be with you. Let us bow our heads and pray for God's blessing. And may Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.